want to talk about another super important thing, which is, I spelled it wrong as well, which is typography. What's typography? Typography is everything that has to do with the pieces of text on your cover. What do I mean by this? There's a bunch of different information that you can have about pieces of text on your cover. So one of the most important things is weight. What is the weight of your text? Now, obviously, you can't just pick up some text and be, oh, this is 2 kilos, this is 2. No, nothing like that. Weight doesn't mean kilograms or pounds or ounces. I don't even know if ounces are weight measurement. I'm English, I'm not American. So weight basically means how thick is the font that you chose. So just like we talked about earlier, if this is one of your pieces of text and it's like that, black and bold, then that has a big weight, that has a large weight. But if you can take the same A, it can be the same font, but with a different weight, and that will be thinner. So basically, is it fat or is it thin? That's essentially what weight means. Now, if you implement this with the hierarchy video and all the other videos we talked about, you can figure out when to use the correct weight in order to control your viewers' eyes correctly. And when it comes to hierarchy, you can just simply change the weight of your text. You don't have to change the font. You don't have to change the size. If you just simply change the weight, then you automatically create hierarchy, because everyone sees the one with the biggest weight first, and then they see the one with the thinner weight, because this takes up more space. People look at what takes up more space always first, and then they go down your design based on what takes up the least amount of space. So whatever takes the most amount of space, that's what they see first. Whatever takes up the least amount of space, that's what they see last. So that's weight. What's the second thing? The second thing is leading. What do I mean by leading? Leading is super simple. Leading simply means what's the difference between the lines of your text. So if you have 3 lines like this and you have the same 3 lines like this, leading is the difference between these lines here. How much white space is in the middle between these lines. So this can say, this is a dog coloring book for kids ages 8 to 12. I hope you like this book. If you have large leading or your leading is super high, then that means the empty space in between your writing is big. So leading is just the empty space between the 2 sentences or the 2 lines of text. Now, why is leading so important? Because sometimes you can have small leading or low leading in order to create better proximity. So if this is your subtitle and you have small leading, then this is super close. So people know that these 2 are put together. But if you have larger leading, then that might allow you to implement maybe an element in the middle. Maybe there's a sword or something. So if we were doing Romeo and Juliet like we did before, we might use leading to separate Romeo from Juliet a little bit more. That way we can add like a sword or something here in the middle if it looks good on the cover. So it all depends on your book and your niche. So leading is super important. We're also going to talk about leading in the formatting module, but for now let's just stick to the book covers. So leading is the difference in space between line 1 and line 2 and line 3. So leading is super important. What else is important? Tracking. Tracking is super important. What's tracking? Super simple. I love saying it's super simple. I'm pretty sure I've said it like 100 times by now, but super simple, one of my favorite words, or 2 words. So tracking is super simple. This is simply the difference between the space of your letters. So while leading is the difference of space between your sentences or the lines, this is the difference in space between the letters. So if we were doing Romeo and Juliet, I can have Romeo like this, or I can have Romeo like this. This one has higher tracking, has more tracking than this one, because this is tightly packed together. Letter after letter is tightly packed together. But this one, the letters are separated even more. So tracking is the difference of space between your letters. A lot of times when you download a font, the tracking is maybe a little bit too close to each other. So you can increase the tracking a tiny bit to give your letters more breathing room, more space in between. So it makes it easier to read on the eye. Sometimes you might even increase the tracking for your author name. That's what I like to do sometimes, because the author name is the least important part. If I increase the tracking, then not only does it make it slightly easier to read, but it also gives it less attention. Because if the author name is like this, all tightly packed together, and then I have the same author name kind of like this, then this kind of gives it more breathing room. This seems a lot more, I don't know, it's all subconscious. I don't know how to explain it, but it's all subconscious. You're going to go in and you can play around with the tracking, play around with the leading, and play around with the weight. of your text and see what looks good, what works, what doesn't work, because it's always different for every single book cover. But for every single book cover, no matter what book cover I make, I always play around with the weights. I always play around with the leading, because sometimes it might look 10 times better if the subtitle is more close to each other rather than far away. And I always play around with the tracking, because you never know. Sometimes it just looks better when it's separated. Sometimes it looks better when it's closely connected, but you won't know unless you try it and you see it with your own eyes. So always test out. If I can give you one piece of advice for the whole book cover module, is always test out everything. Always test, because if you test, you can see visually with your own eyes what your customer is going to see. And unless you see it visually with your own eyes, then you can't really make a decision on what looks good and what doesn't look good. No matter how long you do design, in your mind you might have something, oh, pink might look good with blue, but then you have to find the correct font. So you have to test out a bunch of different fonts. Sometimes just by testing out, you're going to find things that worked even better than you imagined they were going to work. So always test out. Test out the weight of your text, test out the leading of your text, and test out the tracking of your text. And your book covers are going to look a lot more professional.